The wind
Knock,
scraped
knock,
across
knock!
Dry Creek Valley, dragging dust over the bones of the land. It was the kind of silence that made a man forget his own name. A silence too deep, too hollow, even for ghosts. Elias Crowe leaned against the post of his porch, a half-empty canteen in hand, watching the dying sun bleed into the horizon. The world had been dead a
The
long
stories of
time.
your people
He'd
are
just learned how
truly
to live
vast
beside it.
and important.
He turned to go inside when
We
he
carry
heard it
them in our
faint at
hearts
first, like
always.
wind catching on a broken hinge. Then
Then
again, footsteps. Not the heavy kind of wind, but light, uncertain, trembling. He reached for the rifle by the door, more from habit than fear. Please. The word came through the dusk, cracked and small. Don't let me starve. He froze. The voice was young and desperate. When his eyes adjusted, he saw them. 5 figures kneeling just beyond the fence. Girls, no. Women, wrapped in torn shawls, their faces smudged with soot and Sunday. Their lips were cracked, their hands raw from walking the desert barefoot. One of them, the oldest, her eyes dark as burnt cedar, lifted her head. We'll serve you, day and night, she whispered. Just feed us. The rifle sagged in his hands. Elias hadn't heard another soul in weeks, and now 5 of them knelt before him like the last prayer left on earth. Where did you come from? He asked, voice rough from disuse. Our village, the woman said. They burned it. We walked, until there was nothing left to walk on. The youngest, a girl, no older than 16, swayed where she knelt. Elias stepped forward without thinking, catching her before she hit the dirt. Her skin was fever hot, her pulse barely there. For a moment, he saw another face, his daughter's, small, pale, the day he'd lost her to hunger years ago. He cursed softly and looked back at the group. Their eyes met his, not pleading, not manipulative, just empty. Empty enough to break a man. Get up, he said finally. There's water in the trough. They hesitated, as if afraid it was a trick. Go on, he muttered. Before I change my mind. He watched them drink, their shoulders shaking, hands trembling around tin cups. Then he turned away and went inside, telling himself it was just for tonight, that come morning, they'd be gone. But deep down, he knew. Once a man opens his door to the hungry, he never closes it again. Morning crept slow over Dry Creek, turning the sand pale gold. The smell of smoke and dry earth hung in the air. Elias Crowe hadn't slept, not really. All night he'd heard the faint rustle of movement outside, the sound of 5 strangers breathing under his roofline. When he stepped out at dawn, the sight stopped him. They hadn't left. The 5 Apache women knelt again by the porch, hands folded on their laps, eyes lowered. The youngest clutched a tattered shawl like a lifeline. The oldest rose to speak. We'll work for food, she said. We won't steal. Just let us earn what we eat. Elias studied them. Dust streaked their faces, hair matted from the wind. Yet something fierce still lived in their gaze, pride that hadn't died even when everything else had. What's your name? He asked finally. Naira, she said. Then, pointing to the others, Sahana, Lozan, Ahyoka, and Tiva. He nodded toward the barn. There's water and feed inside. You can stay till sundown. After that, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Naira bowed slightly. We'll earn our keep. By noon, the ranch no longer sounded empty. Hoofbeats, the scrape of buckets, soft voices humming in an old Apache tune, sounds that hadn't lived there in years. Elias watched from the porch, pretending to fix the latch on his rifle, though his eyes never left them. Sahana tended the hens, humming while she worked. Lozan split kindling like a man, her arms strong despite the bruises. The smallest, Tiva, tried to carry water too heavy for her, and Elias found himself stepping in before he realized it. Easy, he muttered, taking the bucket. She looked up at him with a shy, grateful smile, one that reached the part of him he'd buried long ago. When night came, they sat in silence around the fire, eating what little he had left, bread, beans, coffee stretched thin. No one spoke, but for the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. By the 3rd morning, Elias Crowe no longer bothered to ask if they planned to leave. The women had already claimed the silence of his ranch, filled it with the rhythm of living. Buckets clanked at the well, the broom swept across the porch, and somewhere in the kitchen, something began to smell like corn. He stood at the doorway, arms crossed, pretending not to notice. He'd spent years watching the wind strip this land bare. Now he watched 5 pairs of hands stitch it back together. Naira moved like she'd done it all her life. Quiet authority. Sharp eyes that noticed every broken hinge, every tool out of place. Sahana laughed softly when Lozen spilled water over her feet. Even that sound laughter startled Elias. He hadn't heard it in his home since his daughter, Grace, was alive. At noon, he sat on the steps while they ate in the dirt nearby, sharing one tin plate between them. They didn't ask for chairs. They didn't ask for anything, just a little bread. He cleared his throat. You don't have to eat outside. Naira looked up, uncertain. It's your table, she said. Elias hesitated. So's the food. That evening, they ate together 6 strangers bound by hunger and silence. Lozen told a story in broken English about crossing the desert. Ahioka hummed a song that made the walls seem less empty. After dinner, Naira stood. Thank you, Mr. Crowe, she said. We'll work for as long as you let us stay. He didn't answer right away. The firelight flickered across their faces, worn, scarred, but alive. Something inside him shifted. You work, you eat, he said finally. That's the only rule here. Naira nodded. Then we'll never go hungry again. Outside, the wind moved softer across the valley, carrying the scent of smoke and hope, the 2 things that had kept mankind alive since the beginning of time. By the end of the week, word had traveled faster than the wind that carried it. Dry Creek was a small place, the kind where secrets didn't last long and kindness always looked suspicious. Elias Crowe hadn't been into town in months, but when he finally rode in for salt and coffee, he could feel the stares before he even dismounted. Outside the general store, 2 men leaned on the railing, whispering just loud enough. Heard the old man's got himself a house full of Apache girls. 5 of 'em, they say, living right under his roof. Guess the war left him lonely. Elias ignored them. He'd learned long ago that words couldn't kill a man unless he listened. But as he stepped inside, he caught sight of Sheriff Walter Haggard, by the counter, arms folded, eyes sharp under the brim of his hat. Morning, Crow, the sheriff said slowly. You've been busy out at the ranch? Elias didn't answer. He paid for his supplies, but the man went on. Town's been talking. Some folks say you're harboring strays. You know the law about vagrants, don't you? Elias set the coin on the counter hard enough to make it ring. They're not vagrants. They're people. The sheriff's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's so? Well, people got to pay their dues to stay in this county. Can't just feed every lost soul that knocks on your door. Elias met his gaze. Then maybe the county's forgotten what it means to be human. When he rode home, the horizon seemed smaller, the dust thicker. He saw the smoke of his chimney long before he reached the gate, and for the first time, that sight brought not comfort, but worry. The women were waiting at the fence. Naira had seen his expression before he said a word. Something's wrong, she murmured. He dismounted, tying his horse slowly. They're talking, he said. They'll come asking questions soon. Sahana looked frightened, but Lozen straightened her back. We won't run, she said. Not again. Elias glanced at them, 5 souls who had already lost everything, and felt something inside him settle. The law could come. The whispers could grow. But he had made his choice the moment he opened that door. Then we'll stand, he said quietly, together. That night, as the lamps burned low, he sat on the porch listening to the wind carry faint voices from the town's suspicion, gossip, fear. But inside, from behind the thin wooden walls, came the softer sound of laughter and women's voices in song. For the first time, the whispers of Dry Creek didn't sound so loud. The morning came dry and bitter, the kind that cracked a man's lips before he spoke. Elias Crowe stood by the corral, watching the horizon turn from gold to gray. The storm had passed days ago, but the air still carried its ghosts, mud-hardened, fences sagged, and the last of his grain barrels sat half-empty. Inside the house, Naira and the women were kneading what little flour was left. Sahana hummed softly, a tune from her people that almost made the room feel less empty. But Elias could see the truth in their faces. The rations were running out, and there was no money left to buy more. He had tried to hide it, sold the last good saddle, counted every bean and bullet, even traded one of his mules for cornmeal. But it wouldn't be enough. Not with the sheriff sniffing around like a hound that had tasted blood. When he rode into town that afternoon, the looks followed him again. The whispers had sharpened. He's gone soft, living with them squaws like their family. Each word hit him like grit in the eye, but he kept his head high. He'd faced worse war, famine, the loss of everything that once made him human. Still, it burned. He stopped at the general store, asked for credit on flour and salt. The owner, Mr. Hill, didn't even look up. "Sheriff told me not to," the man muttered. "Said you're under watch for harboring natives." Elias clenched his jaw. "You think I'd let them starve?" Hill shrugged. "Ain't my place to think. It's the laws." He left without a word. When he returned home, dusk had swallowed the ranch in blue light. Naira met him at the gate, her shawl pulled tight against the wind. "You didn't bring anything," she said quietly. He shook his head. "They've cut us off." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that made truth feel heavier than bullets. Naira's eyes dropped to the dirt. "We'll find a way," she whispered. That night, while Elias sat by the fire carving a broken handle, Naira slipped out. He didn't notice until morning. Her bed was cold, her shawl gone, her tracks leading east toward Dry Creek town. His stomach twisted. He saddled his horse, heart pounding with dread. He knew what men in that town thought of women like her. He'd seen their cruelty before, the mocking, the touching, the hatred that came with ignorance. When he found her hours later, the sun was merciless. Naira stood near the market well, her hair tangled, her hands clutching a small pouch of coins. Her feet were bleeding through cracked sandals. She looked up as he approached. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes were steady. "I sold my mother's bracelet," she said simply. "Silver. It was all I had." Elias dismounted fast, anger and fear warring in his chest. "You shouldn't have gone alone. Do you have any idea what could have happened?" "I had to," she replied, voice low. "You opened your door when no one else would. Let me open one for you." He stared at her, at the pouch in her trembling hand. It wasn't much, maybe enough to pay the fine Sheriff Haggard had nailed to his post last week. But it was everything she had left of her family, her tribe, her past. "Keep it," he said hoarsely. "I won't take that from you." Naira shook her head. "It's not for you. It's for all of us." The marketplace was quiet around them. A few townsfolk stared, whispering again, this time softer, confused. They saw a white man and an Apache woman standing in the dust like two ghosts refusing to die. Finally, Elias reached out and took the pouch. His fingers brushed hers, rough, meeting soft, and something inside him broke open. "You're a damn fool," he murmured. Naira smiled faintly. "So are you." When they rode home, the horizon stretched wide and golden, a ribbon of light across the valley. The ranch waited for them, battered but standing, smoke curling gently from its chimney. As they dismounted, Sahana ran to meet them, eyes wide with relief. "We thought, we're fine," Naira said, cutting her off gently. "We've got what we need." Elias handed her the pouch, the weight of it heavy with more than silver. "Make it last," he said. That night, the fire burned brighter than it had in weeks. The stew pot was thin, but laughter filled the air anyway. And when Elias finally looked at Naira across the table, he realized the price of kindness wasn't gold or land or even safety. It was the courage to keep giving even when the world gave nothing back. The air changed before the storm came, heavy, electric, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Elias Crowe knew the signs. He'd lived through enough dry years to understand that when rain finally returned, it came with fury. All morning, the sky hung low and dark. Naira gathered blankets, Sahana tied the hens inside the coop, and Lozan nailed the shutters while wind whipped her hair across her face. Even little Tiva worked to haul buckets under the porch. "You ever seen rain out here?" Elias asked quietly. Naira shook her head. "Only in my dreams." He almost smiled. "Then, pray your dream doesn't drown the house." By dusk, the first drops came fat, cold, relentless. They hit the dry earth like gunfire, sending up the scent of dust and life all at once. The wind howled, slamming against the wooden walls until they groaned like something alive. Elias ran to the barn to check the horses. Lozan followed without asking. lightning cutting the sky and white fire above them. The animals were panicked, kicking and crying. Together they tied the gates, moving fast, the storm soaking through their clothes until every breath burned. When they stumbled back toward the house, the yard was a river. Mud pulled at their boots, rain stung their faces. The porch light, one-week lantern swayed violently. Naira appeared in the doorway, shouting over the thunder. "Get inside." Inside, the sound was deafening rain drumming on the tin roof, wind whistling through every crack. Buckets filled faster than they could empty them. Elias threw another log on the fire, though the flames sputtered under the drafts. Sahana wrapped Tiva and Ahioka in a quilt, whispering prayers in her language. Naira knelt beside the window, pressing towels against the leaks. Elias watched her sleeves rolled up, face streaked with rain and smoke, and for a moment, she didn't look like a stranger. She looked like something the storm had chosen to spare. "Rest," he said. "I'll keep the fire." Naira looked up at him, her voice soft but certain. "You can't fight a storm alone, Mr. Crowe." The words hit deeper than she meant them to. Hours passed. The storm didn't stop. It just changed shape from rage to sorrow, from thunder to weeping rain. The house creaked but held. When the wind finally calmed near dawn, the desert smelled new again, washed clean of its ghosts. Elias stepped outside barefoot, mud cold between his toes. The land shimmered with puddles, and the sky was a bruised gold. Behind him, the door creaked open. Naira stood there wrapped in a blanket, her hair damp, eyes soft with exhaustion. "It's over," he said quietly. She nodded. "Not for you." He turned to her. "What do you mean? You still live like you're waiting for the next storm." He couldn't answer. The truth was too sharp. He looked toward the horizon where the first light touched the wet earth, a world made new. Inside, Sahana laughed as Tiva splashed water from a broken bucket. Lozen cursed gently at the mess. And for the first time, Elias didn't hear noise, he heard life. He went back inside, took the bucket from Tiva, and set it down carefully. "Let's start patching," he said. "If the rain's gonna visit again, we better be ready for her." Naira smiled faintly, brushing wet hair from her face. "So, we stay?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Reckon it'd be foolish to fix the roof for folks who don't." Outside, the clouds thinned, and the first full sunlight broke through. It poured across the porch, over the mud, and onto 6 souls who had weathered more than one kind of storm and somehow were still standing. The storm had washed the valley clean, but it hadn't washed away hunger. 2 nights after the rain stopped, Elias Crowe noticed the silence again, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses against the skin and waits. The women were asleep. The fire burned low. Elias sat by the table, cleaning the old Winchester he hadn't used in years. The rifle was pitted with rust, its wood split near the grip. He told himself he only cleaned it out of habit, but deep down, he knew better. The tracks he'd seen that morning, boot prints near the far fence. Too fresh, too many had stirred something old in him. A knock came from the wind, soft, wrong. Then a voice. "Evelyn Crowe." He froze. The door opened without permission, and 3 men stepped in, wet boots dripping mud. Faces half hidden by scarves, eyes gleaming with hunger that wasn't just for food. "You got company living out here," the tallest said. "5 Apache girls, ain't it? Word travels quick." Elias stood, his voice calm but low. "Ain't none of your business." The man laughed. "Oh, it's our business. Word in town is you're sitting on silver and government pay. Thought we'd come collect what's fair." Behind him, Naira appeared at the hall's end, quiet as breath. Elias caught her eye, shook his head once, "Stay back." But Lozen didn't wait. From the shadows near the doorway, she moved fast, her hand gripping the wooden handle of the kitchen knife. The blade caught the firelight just as one of the men turned. A struggle broke loose, a crash, shouting, the sound of fists and wood. Elias fired a warning shot into the ceiling, dust raining down like ash. "Enough," he roared. The men froze. Smoke curled from the barrel of his rifle, his expression carved from stone. "You got one chance," he said. "Take what decency you've got left and walk out that door." The leader spat on the floor. "You think you're some kind of savior, Crowe? Feeding strays won't change the world." "Maybe not, Elias said, but it changed mine. He raised the rifle just enough. The man read the truth in his eyes that this rancher, quiet and hollowed out by loss, would kill to protect what little life he'd found again. The intruders backed away slowly, muttering threats into the wind. When the door slammed shut behind them, the house was trembling with silence once more. Elias lowered the gun, chest heaving. Lozen stood beside him, a cut across her cheek, breathing hard. Naira stepped forward, pressing a cloth to the wound. You could have been killed, Elias said. Lozen smirked through the pain. So could you. For a moment, the tension cracked a laugh from Sahana, nervous and fragile, then another from Tiva. Soon the room filled with the shaky sound of life returning. Outside, thunder rumbled far off, only an echo now. Elias stepped onto the porch, the cold air biting at his skin. He could still smell the gunpowder, the rain, the sweat of fear. Behind him, he heard Naira's footsteps. They'll come back, she said quietly. He nodded. Maybe, but they'll find more than they came for. She looked at him, her face lit by the faint lamplight. You didn't have to fight for us. Yes, I did, he said. A man's got to fight for something might as well be what keeps him human. Naira didn't answer, but when she turned back toward the doorway, her hand brushed his arm, a small, unspoken promise that he wasn't alone anymore. Inside, the fire flared up again, painting their shadows tall against the wall. 6 souls who had stared death in the face and found, somehow, that they were still alive. The morning after the fight, the air smelled of ashes and new beginnings. The sky over Dry Creek was washed clean, soft and blue, as if the storm had left behind a promise instead of ruin. Elias Crowe moved slower that day. His shoulder ached from the scuffle, and his thoughts were heavier than usual. The night's violence still echoed in the walls, though the house stood unharmed. Inside, the women worked as if nothing had happened, patching wood, cleaning floors, boiling coffee, but their movements were gentler, quieter. When Tiva passed by him with a bucket, she stopped suddenly. You're bleeding, she said, pointing to his sleeve. Elias glanced down, noticing the tear and the dried red underneath. A scratch, he muttered. Tiva frowned. Still, you should let Sahana clean it. She says infections travel faster than gossip. He chuckled softly, a sound so unfamiliar that it startled even him. You all think you run this place now? She grinned, eyes shining. We do. In the kitchen, Sahana had already set a bowl of water on the table. Sit, she said, voice firm. When he hesitated, she pointed to the chair like a schoolteacher. You fought for us. Let us fight for you. Elias obeyed. The water was cold, her touch warm. The cut stung, but something inside him eased. He hadn't been touched in years, not since his wife's hands had gone still in the fever. Thank you, he murmured. Sahana smiled faintly. You saved us. It's our turn. As the day stretched on, Elias noticed small changes he hadn't before. Lozen was teaching Ahioka how to mend a saddle. Tiva fed the horses without fear now. And Naira, she'd taken to keeping the ranch's books, tallying grain and tools with careful precision. That evening, after supper, they gathered on the porch. The sky bled orange and rose over the horizon. Ahioka began to hum one of her tribal songs, a melody low and ancient, filled with something that sounded like prayer. Elias sat back in his chair, eyes half closed, letting the sound wrap around him like a blanket. Tiva leaned against the railing and whispered, Can we call you something, Mr. Crowe? He opened one eye. Like what? She hesitated, then said softly, Father. The word hung in the air. The others stilled, unsure if it had gone too far. Elias's jaw tightened. The word was a wound and a gift all at once. Naira watched him carefully, ready to intervene. But after a long silence, Elias spoke. If you must, he said, voice low. Just don't expect me to know how to act like one. Tiva smiled. That's all right. We'll teach you. Laughter followed, soft, warm, the kind that chased ghosts out of old walls. When the stars came, Elias stayed on the porch long after the others went to bed. He looked out over the land, his land, and for the first time in years, he didn't see loss. He saw life. The fences needed fixing, the roof still leaked, but the house no longer felt empty. It breathed again. He whispered to the wind, almost ashamed of the hope that stirred in him. Grace, you'd have liked them, he said to the memory of his daughter. They've got your stubborn heart. A breeze brushed across his face, gentle as a hand he remembered. Inside, the lamp burned low, throwing long shadows of 5 women and 1 man bound by something stronger than blood hunger, mercy, and the fragile courage of starting over. For the first time since the war, Elias Crowe slept without the weight of ghosts. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was Father Crowe. By late summer, the valley of Dry Creek had changed. The corn had taken root, the hens had begun to lay, and laughter had become a sound as common as wind. For the first time in years, Elias Crowe's ranch no longer felt like a graveyard. It felt like home, but peace in the West never lasted long. The first sign came as dust on the horizon: 3 riders, the kind that carried more authority than decency. Sheriff Haggard rode in front, flanked by 2 armed deputies. Their coats bore the seal of the county, but their eyes held something colder: judgment. Elias saw them coming and stepped off the porch, rifle slung across his back, boots sinking into the soft earth. Naira stood in the doorway, her sisters behind her. None of them spoke. "Morning, Crowe," Haggard called. His voice was too cheerful, the kind men use before delivering bad news. "Got a bit of paperwork for you." Elias said nothing as the sheriff dismounted and pulled a folded sheet from his saddlebag. The edges were creased, smudged by dust and sweat. "This here's a warrant," Haggard said, holding it out, "for harboring and employing undocumented Apaches on federal land. You know what that means?" Elias took the paper, but didn't look at it. "Means you found another way to call mercy a crime." The sheriff's jaw twitched. "I didn't write the law, Crowe. I just enforce it." Elias looked past him to the deputies, boys barely older than Lozen, hands tight on their rifles but eyes uncertain. "You gonna shoot a man for feeding the hungry?" he asked softly. "That what justice looks like now?" Haggard's face reddened. "Don't test me." Behind Elias, Naira stepped forward. Her shawl fluttered in the wind, her eyes steady. "If they want to take us," she said, "they'll have to take us standing." The sheriff turned on her. "You'd best hold your tongue, girl." But Elias moved between them, his voice low but steady. "You talk to me, not them." For a moment, the air itself seemed to hold still. The cicadas went quiet. Even the wind paused. Then came another sound, the creak of a wagon wheel. From the road, a handful of townsfolk approached: farmers, blacksmiths, a few wives with baskets of corn. They'd followed the riders, curious or maybe angry, but now they stopped short, watching. One old man, Caleb Morton, the mill owner, stepped forward. "Sheriff," he called, "you can put your paper away." "This ain't your business, Caleb." "It is," the old man said, voice shaking but strong. "Crowe feeds half this town when the stores run dry. If the law's gonna punish him for that, then maybe it's the law that's wrong." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A woman spoke up. "He gave bread to my boys when their pa died in the mines." Another, "Those girls helped fix my roof after the storm." The sheriff turned red, his authority bleeding away like water through sand. "You all best clear out before I—" Before he could finish, Lozen stepped forward, chin high. "You say you serve justice," she said, "but all I see is fear of it." The words hit harder than any bullet. Elias watched Haggard's grip tighten on his holster, then loosen. The man wasn't built for courage. He was built for control, and he'd already lost it. With a curse under his breath, the sheriff tore the warrant in half. "You'll regret this, Crowe," he spat. "You can't save everyone." Elias met his glare calmly. "A man don't have to save everyone," he said. "Just the ones God puts on his doorstep." The sheriff mounted his horse and rode off, the deputies following. The crowd began to disperse, their relief soft and fragile, like the first rain after drought. When it was over, Naira turned to Elias. Her voice trembled, though her eyes didn't. "You stood for us." He exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing into his bones. "No," he said. "We stood for each other." That night, the ranch was alive with sound, the crackle of the hearth, the murmur of voices, laughter mixing with the hiss of coffee on the stove. But outside, under the stars, Elias sat alone on the porch, staring at the torn scraps of paper in his hands. The law had left, but it would return again someday, wearing a different face, speaking in a different voice. Yet for now, peace was theirs. Naira joined him, carrying 2 tin cups. "For courage," she said, handing one to him. He raised it slightly. "For family." They drank in silence. The wind moved through the valley, soft and steady, carrying the scent of soil and smoke, the smell of survival. For the first time in his life, Elias Crowe realized he wasn't fighting to live anymore. He was living to protect something worth dying for. Autumn came quietly to Dry Creek Valley. The sun was softer now, the air cool enough to breathe without tasting dust. What had once been a dying ranch had become something else entirely, a refuge, a beating heart in the middle of the wilderness. Elias Crowe stood at the edge of his field, watching rows of corn sway under a silver morning. The stalks rose tall and proud, stubborn as the people who had planted them. Behind him, laughter floated from the porch, Tiva chasing chickens, Lozen pretending not to enjoy it, Sahana calling after them with mock anger. Inside, Naira was teaching Ahyoka to read from an old Bible, tracing each word with a finger. "Mercy," she whispered slowly, sounding it out. "It means to forgive without reason." Elias smiled at the sound of her voice. He never thought his home would hold words like that again. By noon, travelers began to appear, a woman with 2 children, a limping minor, a runaway boy no older than 12. They came hungry, broken, ashamed. Each time, Naira would glance at Elias for permission, though they both already knew his answer. "Feed them," he'd say simply. "There's always enough." Word spread fast. They began calling his ranch the House of the Lost. At first it embarrassed him, but over time, the name settled into his bones like something earned. One evening, as the sun bled over the hills, Elias sat on the porch sharpening a hoe. Naira joined him, her skirt dusted with flour. "You ever think we'd come this far?" she asked. He shook his head. "Didn't think there was a far left to go." She smiled faintly. "People say you're a saint now." He snorted. "I'm just a man who didn't close his door fast enough." The wind carried the scent of bread baking, of wood smoke, and earth. Somewhere inside, Ahyoka began to sing again, that same soft tribal melody she always returned to when the world felt too heavy. Naira rested her hands on the porch rail. "You saved more lives than you know, Elias." He looked at her, eyes tired but bright. "They saved me first." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sun dipped lower, painting the valley gold. A dozen lights flickered to life across the ranch, lanterns in the windows, glowing like stars fallen to earth. And for the first time in a lifetime of wandering, Elias Crowe understood what home really meant. Not walls, not land, but the people who refuse to let you starve, even when they're starving too. Winter came early that year. The winds from the north carried dust and frost down the valley, curling through the fences of Crow Ranch like the memory of harder days. But the house stood warm. Inside, the hearth burned steady, the air filled with the scent of bread and laughter. Elias Crowe sat by the fire, carving a new handle for the broken shovel. The light flickered across his face, tracing the lines time had etched there, not bitterness anymore, but the quiet shape of peace. Around him, life moved in gentle circles. Sahana stirred a pot of stew. Lozen patched a blanket. Tiva chased the cat near the stairs, her giggles ringing like bells. And Naira, she moved through it all like sunlight through the smoke. "Dinner's nearly ready," she said, placing another loaf on the table. "You've worked enough for one lifetime, Elias." He smiled faintly. "You'd think so, but this ranch don't stop needing me just because I'm getting old." "You're not old," she said softly. "You're home." The words settled into him like embers sinking into coals. Later that evening, more visitors arrived, a widow with her boy, a miner missing an arm, 2 ranch hands traveling with nothing but hope and sore feet. They were greeted not with suspicion but with bowls of stew, blankets, and a place by the fire. The rule was simple now, spoken by everyone who lived there. No one leaves Crow Ranch hungry. As the new guests ate, Ahyoka began to sing that same Apache song of gratitude she always offered before each meal. Her voice, soft and raw, rose into the rafters, meeting the hiss of the fire and the sigh of the wind. Even the strangers went silent. Elias watched her, remembering a night years ago, 5 women kneeling in the dust, whispering, "Don't let us starve." Now they were the ones feeding others. He rose slowly and stepped outside. The night was cold, sharp enough to bite, but clear. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. He could see his breath rise in the moonlight, proof that he was still alive. Behind him, the door creaked open. Naira stood there with a lantern in hand, the glow painting her face gold. "You should come inside," she said. "It's freezing." "In a minute," he replied, just listening. "To what?" "The world," he said. "She's quieter than she used to be." She came to stand beside him. Together they watched the valley, a sea of shadow and silver light. In the distance, he could see faint dots of other lanterns flickering along the trail. People making their way toward the ranch. "They'll keep coming," Naira murmured. He nodded. "Then we'll keep baking." She laughed softly, the sound warmer than the fire inside. "You sound like a preacher." "I sound like a man who's learned what matters." For a while, neither spoke. The wind eased, carrying the scent of smoke and bread. It was a scent he'd once associated with sorrow, with memory, but now it meant life. Elias turned to her, his voice quieter than the wind. "You remember that first night?" She smiled faintly. "How could I forget? You looked like you'd rather face wolves than 5 starving women." He chuckled. "Maybe I would've. But you were hungrier than wolves. And you were lonelier than ghosts." He couldn't deny it. He looked down at his hands, at the scars time had left there, then back at the house glowing behind them. "Guess we both found what we needed." She nodded, eyes glimmering in the lantern light. "We all did." Inside, laughter swelled again, children's voices, clinking cups, the hum of a home that had learned to live without fear. Elias took a slow breath and looked toward the horizon one last time. The stars over Dry Creek burned steady, unbothered by time or storm. Somewhere out there, his wife and daughter were resting in peace, not because he'd moved on, but because he'd learned how to stay. He whispered to the wind, "No one's lost anymore." Then he turned back toward the door, where warmth and the smell of bread waited not for him alone, but for everyone who still had hunger left in their souls. And as he stepped inside, the lantern light closed around him like a blessing, the house glowing golden against the night, a monument not to strength or wealth, but to mercy. For in the end, that was what saved him. Not the bread he gave, but the love he learned to share.